Hey, have you ever lost someone you really loved? It sucks, man. Let me tell you about my uncle. He looked just like John Witherspoon, but with a wonky eye. He was a mechanic but couldn't fix cars, and he'd always wear overalls, even fancy silk ones for special occasions. He was a Vietnam vet and a crazy strong dude. He used to drive my dad around, would see firsthand the violence that my father produced and tell me stories about him. We'd talk for hours and hours, sometimes 8 to 10 hours a day. My cousin went to prison for 15 years, so all my uncle's energy went to me. His daughter had 3 girls who I was super close with. I loved having them as my family. It was my only peace during that time. We'd play Monopoly and Uno, but I never let them when they had to know who was the boss. My cousin was adopted, but I didn't even know until after my uncle died. His family never talked about it. When my uncle passed, I lost my connection to them too. They stopped talking to us and it broke my heart. I missed out on seeing them grow up and going to their birthdays. I needed them more than they knew. Man, when my uncle died, my sis and I were massive Tupac fans, like, hardcore. We even tried to solve his murder like some Harriet the Spy shit. We were a Tupac family, repping KC like we were from Cali. Crazy thing is, both Tupac and my uncle died on September 13th, 9 years apart. I remember praying for a sign from God about my path right before my uncle passed, and I guess that was it. We had a small fight the week before he died, and I thought I didn't need him anymore. But when he passed, I took it hard. I forgot what he even looked like. Man, I loved my uncle. Before he died, he knew I always wanted to meet the other side of my family. We didn't even know how to get in touch with my dad's side of the family. I had never even met half of my family or seen a picture of my dad before then. But they reached out after my uncle's passing, and even though my mom and sis didn't want to see them, I was eager to meet them. They left us right after my father was killed. It took them 21 years to come around. When I finally met them, they were in tears. My uncle's death was like opening a door that I never knew existed. I was able to spend time and meet cousins, aunts, uncles, and people I never got a chance to meet. But it was really hard. The day my uncle died was insane. My sister asked me when was the last time I talked to him, and it had been weeks at that point. I broke down out of guilt. We rushed over to his house, which was the same one I grew up in. He was living there and I got there just in time before they took his body out. But they wouldn't let me see him. His face had melted and his scalp was on the floor. From the summer heat. Blood and fluids everywhere, even bending the wood in our living room floor. My uncle Jimmy was prideful, he had heart problems, and no one knew. He had open heart surgery a week before he passed and walked home directly after the surgery. And get this, it rained for about 5 minutes in the middle of summer right over our house when he died. I've had so many coincidences in my life. So my spiritual birthday was the same day my uncle died. Years later, September 13th is when I left to Cali. Every year around that time, I get some new understanding or wisdom. It was like clockwork. I believe that each person has a specific date that symbolizes their personal breakthrough. For me, that is the date. Losing my uncle was tough. I wasn't the same happy-go-lucky kid anymore. I was alone and had nothing, and even though everyone looked up to me, my mom wanted me gone. I cried for years. But like Forrest Gump said, that's all I gotta say about that. Okay, so now. I don't really know how to say this or whatever, but basically I want to show you the spirit world from a logical, methodological and reasoning perspective. Back in 2012, I gave up Christianity and burned my Bible in my backyard, and asked God for the truth. My family has always been into supernatural stuff. My mom was really into it when I was a kid, and my sister was too before she got into some trouble. My mom always said there was a halo around me, and I always seemed to get out of trouble even when it didn't make sense. At this point, you know from the previous chapters that I should have died so many times, but somehow I always made it back home. Even my close friends couldn't explain it. I've had so many unexplained experiences, not all supernatural, but still weird stuff, like vivid dreams that I couldn't remember, and small things like throwing away food and then finding it back on the table. I started studying Egyptology and a frackin' spiritual science, like Ifa, hoodoo, cabal, alchemy and dark magic to try to understand what was going on. I wanted to understand the spiritual side and figure out why all these things were happening to me. I knew God existed, but which God did I come from? I spent almost a decade reading a book a week, studying demons, the afterlife, and developing my own philosophy and understanding of the universe. But nothing really happened. I didn't get any proof of an afterlife or anything like that. I even tried fasting and meditating, but still nothing. I just really wanted to know the truth, you know? So, in September 2020, I started working with some real witches and warlocks. Some were just starting out, others were high level. I have a bunch of other titles too, like Grandmaster, Sensei, Dharma Yoga, Zen Master, and Therapist. I was all of that, but these people were the ones who helped me realize I wasn't losing my mind. I was actually releasing my demons and aligning with my highest self. But listen to me, my goal right here is to shine a light on dark magic and show y'all how to get rid of it. I'm trying to help y'all find some proof that God is real and get ready for when the end comes, because some of us going to be rebuilding society in God's image. I always knew God was out there. I've had too many coincidences to doubt it. I just wonder if He's hearing me and if I'm doing right by Him. So keep an open mind around all this stuff. When I started practicing dark magic, it took years before I saw anything supernatural that I couldn't explain logically. People would even come up to me and say they dreamt about me being a prophet, sage or something like that. I always brushed it off, but deep down, I needed to know more. I was living in a hostel at the time and met this lady who told me my future. It was a brief conversation, but it left me shook. At this point, I was in the best physical and mental shape. I started meditating and learning from my Zen master, and things started to click. She saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself, which was freaky but also kind of cool. I trained in Buddhism, meditated for hours each day. My martial arts sensei taught me how to meditate with my eyes open. My yoga instructor taught me how to breathe once a minute, and I was even punching concrete without breaking my hand. I shared my experiences with these people, and they didn't think I was crazy. In fact, our conversations became casual and accepted. I felt like I was finally in the know. So, I once saw my senior sensei fight with his eyes closed and was able to block every punch and kick, effortlessly, and it motivated me to train even harder. I was putting in 60 to 80 hours a week for music and martial arts and meditating for 4 hours a day. It gave me access to the unknown and the unknowns. I wanted to activate my other senses, and boy did I. I learned to recognize my abilities, from telekinesis to telepathy. But I still had no control. I was full-on hippie mode, rocks, crystals, candles, and yoga. I was doing it all. And then I started seeing things. My peripheral vision increased dramatically, and I started hearing colors and seeing thoughts. I even figured out how to move stuff with my mind. It started with fire, then things would move on their own. I was all about respecting nature, too, always asking permission before I went to the park and giving thanks to my surroundings. And after yoga class, I would meditate and see the 1,000-leaf lotus flower. It was like everything just moved out of my way respectfully, not in fear. That's when I knew I wasn't alone. I couldn't control my ability, but I knew it was real. It wasn't something I just made up anymore. I was hoping I was wrong or crazy, but people would tell me, that didn't happen to me until I was. Or it's good you're seeing this now. I was training with my sensei and grandmaster almost every day. But then, the senior belt instructor in our group lost all respect for me. I tried to make things right, but he didn't want anything to do with me. He even wanted me to press charges against my crazy roommate for pulling a knife on me before, but my sensei didn't agree with that. Then, I found out that another sensei who I thought was a super kind guy actually hated my guts. These people ended up becoming the biggest enemy I've ever faced, not because they were strong, but because they were sneaky in my weaknesses. I trusted them completely and they were like family to me, but then I realized they didn't support my dream of starting my own business and pursuing music. So, I teamed up with Tommy, the spineless sensei, and I put everything into starting my business and making my dreams come true. But that wasn't easy either. Tommy did absolutely nothing to help. I worked 20-hour days and built up all these websites and social media accounts to promote our businesses and to make money. I used this as a distraction because being vulnerable is hard for any musician, let alone someone that has gone through what I have. I was burned out, tired, jaded. And he just sat there. I thought he was afraid of failing, but after spending $25,000, I realized he actually wanted me to fail. Oh, and I forgot to mention, anytime I would talk about killing myself, Tommy would actually micro-smile. I know, messed up, right? But at the time, I just brushed it off because I trusted him with my life. He was my shoulder to cry on and I was so afraid to be alone. I left everything I ever knew 10 years ago and burned every single bridge. He was my last friend, and now he's become my biggest regret and enemy. He played the long game and used my love for him against me. It was the ultimate betrayal. He set a trap and was just waiting for his chance to attack me. And when I begged him for help, He finally revealed his true colors and suggested that I just give up and go back home. It was like he was planning my failure this whole time. I was so angry, I almost spit in his face. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "Do you really think I'm here to prove something to some old washed man who never even went after his dreams, let alone tried anything?" It was like he was trying to bring me down and crush my spirit, but I wasn't going to let him. He was a weasel snake and the greatest enemy I've ever faced because I had nothing to attack. He wasn't being unreasonable, triggering, or confrontational, he was just being sneaky and manipulative. I had to figure out his intentions, and it was like he had set up a perfect trap and was just waiting for his chance to attack. He was a weasel snake, always slithering around and trying to take me down. So, back in September 2020 I decided to make an ancestor shrine, and things got real crazy real from there. I would pray and sometimes see these little sprites like 1 to 4 times a day. I know, sounds weird as hell, right? But I also heard trumpets and saw things moving around. At first, I thought I was losing my damn mind, but then other people started seeing it too. It's like, if you're gonna mess around with this stuff, you gotta understand that fear and faith are like the currencies of the spirit world. I'm not saying you should do it, but if you want to see the truth, I'll show you. Just remember that you have to decide what to fear and how to fear it. You could lose your mind, I almost did. But anyways, back to my story. So, for years, I couldn't remember my dreams until I met with a hypnotherapist who did this thing called a mirror meditation. Basically, you put your feet in salt water and stare at your third eye in the mirror for 30 minutes while listening to hypnotic music. After the first few times, I started seeing shadows come from my body. And after a month of that, I started using my ancestral altar and my dreams went from 0 to 100. I was having like 1,000 dreams a night, dreaming about people I never met before and experiencing all my senses in the dreams. It was wild, man. But then the hauntings started to get worse. My bed would shake and levitate off the ground, and I always felt like something was in my room, even when it wasn't. I started calling on my ancestors and multiple deities for help, and they actually started answering me. I'd ask questions and get an answer via osmosis if my mind was clear. I know it sounds crazy, but trust me, it happened. I wouldn't hear voices, but I'd hear a different voice when I talked to myself. Like a different narrator. At this point, I still hadn't read the Bible in like 10 years and was fully studying the dark arts. I would have laughed in your face if you told me the Son of God was real. Until one day, September 13, 2020, I got a visit from a spirit claiming to be Jesus while driving down the highway. We talked for like 15 minutes, and then I was back on the highway, only a second had actually passed. It was crazy, man. I talked to my therapist about it, and he said it wasn't schizophrenic or a hallucination. My sensei was a Christian, and he didn't believe me, but he kind of did. It took me another year to figure it all out, but I realized that I was worshiping the devil and all these haunting and superpowers came from a dark source. It was like spaghetti and meatballs, you know? And that the Bible was true. I gave all my stuff away and burned everything else. The hauntings stopped, the spirits left, but the visions and premonitions stayed. God gave me proof, man. I learned that if it doesn't come from him, it comes from the devil. So, I started focusing on being as pure as possible. No booze, no XXX websites, no manual job. If you know what I am saying, and trying not to sin on purpose. And it worked. God started talking to me and I knew that everything I had before came from lies and manipulation. So, I stopped lying and manipulating people and just focused on my music and God. So, I gotta tell you guys, something crazy happened to me. I stopped hiding from the mystery of the world and started learning about the personality of God and the anguish of God. And you know what? My understanding of everything started to increase. It was like I could see God's plan unfolding right before my eyes. I knew I had to share my whole story, even the stuff that I was super embarrassed about. I still don't know what my role is in this whole plan. Maybe I'm a prophet, maybe not. But what I do know for sure is that God and the devil exist, and heaven and hell are actual places. It's not just some feeling or something we made up. And we're all being tested, man. Some of us more than others.